Good morning, respected participants of the 13th Conaplin 2020. I would like to present my mini research on evaluation of an English textbook. Does English in Mind promote critical thinking skills? I'm Bernard Richard Nainggolan, a postgraduate student of English Education, Indonesia University Education 2020. Okay, so before I start my presentation, this presentation will be divided into four. The first is the rationale, methods, findings, and discussion. And the last, I will be coming with my conclusion. Okay, let me start by the rationale. In the 21st century, the changing of the world is undeniable, and it is affected by the technology and information growth. It is indicated by the changing of information through social media and other platforms. That's why the role of education is really needed to provide the students with the skill that can help them survive in the 21st century. One of the most needed skills in the 21st century is the critical thinking skills. Why are those skills are really important? Some experts agree that the critical thinking skills are to improve the attention and observation, to solve problems, to respond to information, to facilitate the skills of analysis and evaluation, to help the students or learners avoid personal bias, and to make the students successful in their study. The question is how critical thinking can be taught. Enhlish in 1992 and Viewpoint in 2010 stated that critical thinking can be taught by the infusion approach. Infusion approach is the implementation of critical thinking teaching through subjects. Therefore, the use of textbook are going to be significant to explicitly teaching critical thinking at school. Now, let's talk about the previous studies of critical thinking on textbook. There are several studies. Now, we are going to discuss some of them. The first two studies by Asali and Igbaria in 2014 in Israel and El-Sahi and Al-Fatihi in Morocco in 2019. Both studies examined English textbook and they use Bloom's taxonomy for their framework, and the findings showed that the textbook promoted lower order of thinking. And the next studies was Burjandi and Alizade's study in 2012. They evaluated 3 English textbooks in Iran using the Bloom's taxonomy with added with some elements of critical thinking such as deduction, induction, building a community thinkers, balanced thinking, multiple perspective taking, and creative thinking. However, this study did not elaborate how those additional elements implemented in their framework. And the findings shows that the textbook they evaluated promoted lower order thinking, and also it promoted building a community thinkers. And the last studies by Elias in 2015 that studied 9 English textbooks in the context of EFL in Indonesia, and the study of Solihati and Hikmat in 2018. They studied critical thinking on Indonesian language textbook. So the 2 studies were conducted in investigating textbook in the context of Indonesia as EFL and also as Indonesian language. However, these 2 studies revealed that the textbooks promoted few elements of critical thinking. So each of studies was promoting critical thinking around 15%, and Solihati and Hikmat study promoted critical thinking around 70%. The 2 studies were based on the Elias critical thinking framework. Now, I'll be talking the methods of the textbook evaluation. Okay, the textbook evaluation was based on the Elias critical thinking framework, which is the result of synthesizing 21 critical thinking theories. And then the study used content analysis, focusing on the qualitative approach, while the quantitative data was used to see the percentage of the tasks or the questions. And third, the implicit questions or tasks were taken from 10 out of 14 chapters of English in my level 3. And the questions were then coded, based hypothesis coding by Saldana in 2013. And finally, the potential categories were reviewed and analyzed. Okay, here I briefly show you the Elias critical thinking framework in 2015. Elias listed and stated some categories of critical thinking framework. They are clarification, assumption, reason, evidence, implication, consequence, alternative, viewpoints or perspectives, question, prediction, agreement or disagreement, summary, and conclusion. One more time, this critical framework was the synthesis of the 21 critical thinking theories. So this critical thinking framework was considered stronger enough than other critical thinking theory framework. Now let's talk about the findings. From 168 implicit questions, there were 102 questions which were categorized to encourage critical thinking skills. The categories found in the English in my level 3s to promote critical thinking skills were dominated by clarification question, viewpoint, prediction, reason, and evidence. However, in the discussion, we are going to discuss the clarification, viewpoints, and predictions. Now let's go to the discussion. In the discussion, we're going to discuss the 3 categories that I've mentioned before, and then we are going to try to develop the questions to be more critical. From the less critical to be more critical, from the critical enough to be more critical. So let's go to the first category, that is the clarification categories. The findings showed that there were 5 types of clarification questions. So we can see there were 5 types of clarification questions. The first is clarification of tenses or questions or sentences. The second is clarification of examples. The third, clarification of text structures. And the fourth, the clarification of themes or topics of a text. And the last is the clarification of words or phrases. Now let's talk one by one. The first, the clarification of tenses. So we can see the question. The students were asked to underline the tenses. However, this question was considered less critical because the students were just asked to underline or just to mention. So we can make the question 1 to be more critical by adding a question of reason. So question number 1 could be more critical if it is added with question of reasons. Example of question of reason is, why are the 2 tenses used? Now let's move to question 2, clarification of examples. So I think this was considered less critical because it just requires the student memory or general knowledge. However, we can make this question become more critical by adding a question of perspective or viewpoint. Example, what do you think of the shows? Okay, so it will be considered more critical. And question number 3, okay, in question number 3, it asks the student about the organization of the letter, okay? And one more time, we can make this question become more critical by adding a question of reason. Why is it important to write the name of a person in the letter? So the students might be coming with the argumentation. And the fourth question was considered critical enough. And now let's move to the question 5 of the clarification question. So the question asks the student to clarify the meaning of the adjective from the reading. One more time, I consider this question was less critical because probably they just like recall their memory about these words, but we can make it more critical by adding tasks to use the language in the sentences. So the possible question added to make question 5 become more critical is write your sentences, write your own sentences using those words. So I considered it will be more critical. Okay, now the second category is the viewpoint. There are 4 types of viewpoint categories. The first is viewpoint of discussion by having a group discussion or in pair discussion. The second is direct question. The third is using the yes/no question, and the last is using WH question. So from the 4 questions, question 1, 2, and 4 were considered critical enough, but it will be more critical if we add question about evidence. So question 1, 2, and 4 would be critical enough if it is added with the question of evidence. Example, support your idea by giving example. Okay, and question 3, I think question 3 was really less critical because it just yes/no question. So we need to make students give the reason or argument by adding a question of reason. Why do you think so? And this is gonna be the last. The last is the prediction categories. So there were 3 the categories using the possible themes or topic of a text before they read the text. And the second is the prediction of the continuation of a text. And the last is the prediction of their student's perspective. Okay. Now, question 1 could be more critical if the prediction involves the clarification. Okay. So instead of thinking or mentioning the 2 methods of communication, they could discuss the methods of the communication with their partner. And question 3 could be more critical if the prediction is added with the reason or argument, such as provide any reason to support your predictions. Now this is going to be the last. So critical thinking can be taught as the innovation approach, such as and through the class activities. Thus, the textbook can be used to teach critical thinking explicitly. And 2, this study is very limited to the English in Mind Level 3, as it is one of the globally used English textbook in many countries. So, okay, so there might be further research of critical thinking on the global use English textbook. And the third, from the finding, we can suggest that the textbook writers, teachers, and school stakeholders can include more categories of the critical thinking in their textbook questions. And also it is suggested to the teachers or to school stakeholders to improve the question on the textbook to be more critical. And the last is the Ilias critical thinking framework can be used to other texts such as science or social or other textbook. That's all my presentation. Thank you.